Stephen Bartlett has inspired millions with his success stories. But when he heard how his content was destroying a 16-year-old girl's mental health, he did something that shocked everyone in the studio. The Tonight Show studio buzzed with its usual Tuesday evening energy. Stephen Bartlett sat across from Jimmy Fallon, his crisp black blazer reflecting the success that had made him a household name among young entrepreneurs worldwide. The Roots had just finished their musical transition, and the cameras were rolling. Jimmy's iconic curved desk gleamed under the professional studio lights, while the New York City skyline twinkled through the backdrop windows. Stephen was in his element, discussing his meteoric rise from Manchester to becoming the youngest person on Dragon's Den, his successful podcast, Diary of a CEO, and the social media empire he'd built before turning 30. So, Stephen, Jimmy said, leaning forward with genuine curiosity, you've basically cracked the code on social media influence. Millions of people watch your videos every day. What's the secret to creating content that actually changes people's lives? Stephen smiled that confident smile that had charmed investors and inspired countless young entrepreneurs. You know, Jimmy, it all comes down to authenticity mixed with actionable value. People don't want to just be entertained anymore. They want to feel like they're growing, learning, becoming the best version of themselves. The audience was engaged, several young people in the front rows nodding along with obvious admiration. Stephen continued, his British accent lending authority to every word. When I post a video about morning routines or business strategies, I'm not just sharing information. I'm sharing a blueprint for transformation. That's the responsibility I feel every time I hit publish. Jimmy nodded appreciatively. And you're doing this across multiple platforms, right? TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. How do you manage to stay authentic across all these different algorithms? That's the fascinating part, Stephen replied, his eyes lighting up with passion. Each platform has its own psychology, its own way of capturing attention. On TikTok, you've got maybe 3 seconds to hook someone. On YouTube, you can build deeper narratives. Instagram is about aspirational lifestyle content. He gestured as he spoke, clearly comfortable in his role as a thought leader. The key is understanding that behind every algorithm is a human being with dreams, fears, and ambitions. When you speak to those core human emotions, the algorithm becomes irrelevant. Jimmy was thoroughly engaged. But with that kind of reach, with millions of young people hanging on your every word, don't you ever worry about the pressure, the responsibility? Stephen's expression grew slightly more serious. Absolutely, every day. When you realize that a single video might be seen by more people than live in entire cities, you understand that influence isn't just about reach, it's about impact, and impact can be positive or negative. The conversation was flowing naturally, touching on the psychology of social media, the attention economy, and the double-edged nature of digital influence. You know what's interesting, Jimmy continued, is that you've been very open about mental health, about the struggles that come with success. That's not typical for most influencers, right? Stephen nodded thoughtfully. I think there's a dangerous narrative in the success space where everyone pretends the journey is always upward, always positive. The reality is that growth is messy. Success can be isolating. Achievement doesn't automatically equal happiness. He paused, considering his next words carefully. I try to show both sides, the wins and the losses, the breakthroughs and the breakdowns. Because if young people only see the highlight reel, they're setting themselves up for disappointment and comparison. The studio audience was hanging on every word, clearly relating to the idea that social media often presented an unrealistic version of reality. That's so important, Jimmy agreed, because social media can be this incredible tool for inspiration, but it can also become this comparison trap where people feel like they're never doing enough, never achieving enough. Exactly, Stephen replied with conviction. And that's why I always try to emphasize process over outcome, progress over perfection. Because the moment someone starts measuring their worth against someone else's highlight reel, they've already lost. It was in this moment of thoughtful conversation that a voice from the audience cut through the studio atmosphere. Mr. Bartlett, both Stephen and Jimmy turned toward the sound. In the fourth row, a woman in her early 40s was standing. She wore a simple navy cardigan over a white blouse, and her hands were clasped tightly together. Her face showed the kind of exhaustion that comes from emotional strain carried too long. I'm sorry to interrupt, she continued, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "But I need to tell you something about your motivational content." The studio fell into profound silence. This wasn't scripted. This wasn't planned. But something in the woman's voice told everyone that this moment had become bigger than entertainment. Stephen stood up slowly. "Of course. What's your name?" "Sarah," she replied, her voice now clearly audible. "Sarah Mitchell from New Jersey." "Sarah from New Jersey," Stephen repeated, stepping toward the edge of the stage. "What did you want to tell me?" Sarah took a visible breath, steeling herself. "My daughter Emma is 16. She's been watching your videos religiously for the past 2 years. Your morning routine videos, your success mindset content, your business advice." Stephen nodded, his expression showing genuine interest. "That's wonderful that she's interested in personal development at such a young age." "No," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "It's not wonderful." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Stephen's confident demeanor shifted, confusion replacing certainty. "What do you mean?" Stephen asked gently. Sarah's composure began to crack. "Emma hasn't eaten a normal meal in 6 months. She wakes up at 4 a.m. every day because you said successful people wake up early. She's created these impossible morning routines based on your videos: meditation, journaling, workout, cold shower, affirmations." The studio audience was completely silent. She's failing her classes because she spends all her time trying to build the perfect productivity system instead of just being a teenager. She doesn't hang out with friends anymore because she says they're not growth-minded enough. Stephen's face had gone pale. "But the worst part," Sarah continued, her voice breaking, "is that she hates herself. Every single day, she feels like a failure because she can't live up to the standards she thinks successful people have. She watches your videos about discipline and achievement, and then she cries because she thinks she's not disciplined enough." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face. "Last month, I found her making a list of all the ways she was disappointing you. You, someone she's never met. She wrote, 'Stephen would be ashamed of how lazy I am,' at the top of the page." The silence was deafening. Stephen stood frozen, the weight of what he was hearing hitting him like a physical blow. "Sarah," Stephen said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea. I never intended." "I know you didn't," Sarah replied, maintaining eye contact. "That's what makes this so hard. You're trying to help people, but Emma isn't seeing inspiration in your content. She's seeing a standard she can never reach, and it's killing her." Stephen looked down for a moment, processing. When he looked back up, something fundamental had shifted in his expression. Without consulting producers, he stepped down from the stage and began walking into the audience towards Sarah. "Sarah," he said, his voice now completely stripped of performance, of expertise, of authority. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." He reached her row, and Sarah sat down, but kept her eyes fixed on his. The cameras followed his movement, but everyone understood this was no longer about television. "Has Emma ever talked about hurting herself?" Stephen asked, the question cutting through the studio like a blade. Sarah's face crumpled. "Yes," she whispered. "She said if she can't be successful like the people she admires, maybe there's no point." Stephen closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. When he opened them again, they were filled with tears. "Jimmy," Stephen called out, not turning around, still facing Sarah. "I need to say something to your cameras, to everyone watching." Jimmy had left his desk and was now standing at the edge of the stage. "Stephen, whatever you need." Stephen turned to face the main camera, his usual confidence completely absent. What replaced it was something more powerful: absolute honesty. "My name is Stephen Bartlett, and I've spent the last 5 years creating content designed to motivate and inspire people," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion. "I've talked about morning routines, about discipline, about the habits of successful people. And I've done it because I genuinely believed I was helping." He paused, looking back at Sarah, then returned his attention to the camera. "But I've just learned that my content has contributed to a 16-year-old girl hating herself. That my videos about success and productivity have become a source of shame and self-destruction for someone who should be focused on simply being a teenager." The studio audience was completely still, understanding they were witnessing something unprecedented in the world of social media's influence. Success is about being kind to yourself. It's about progress, not perfection. It's about understanding that you are enough exactly as you are, right now. Stephen looked directly into the camera lens. Emma, if you're watching this, I would rather you'd never watched another one of my videos than continue to use them as a weapon against yourself. You don't need to wake up early to be valuable. He turned back to Sarah, who was now openly crying from relief that her daughter's pain was being acknowledged. Sarah, I want to create content specifically for Emma and kids like her. Content that talks about self-compassion, about the danger of comparison. Stephen reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. I'm going to record a personal message for Emma, right here, right now. And then, I'm going to delete every piece of content on my platforms that could contribute to self-hatred. The audience gasped audibly. This was Stephen Bartlett's entire business model, and he was talking about dismantling it. Jimmy stepped forward. Stephen, that's incredibly brave. If my content is contributing to teenage depression, then I need to completely rethink what I'm putting into the world, Stephen replied. He looked back at Sarah. Would Emma be willing to talk to me, just so I can understand what went wrong? Sarah nodded enthusiastically. She would love that. She still admires you, Stephen. She just needs to know that she's okay as she is. Stephen turned back to the camera one final time. To everyone watching, especially young people, you don't need to optimize your life to be worthy of love. You don't need to achieve anything to be enough. His voice broke slightly as he continued. You matter because you exist. You're valuable because you're human. The applause that followed wasn't typical game show applause. It was something deeper, something that acknowledged genuine transformation happening in real time. Jimmy, his voice thick with emotion, addressed both Stephen and Sarah. This is why real conversations matter. This is why vulnerability and honesty are more powerful than any algorithm. The show ended differently that night. No standard closing segment. Just Jimmy and Stephen sitting with Sarah as the credits rolled, three people connected by understanding that influence without responsibility is dangerous. When the episode aired 2 weeks later, it sparked the largest conversation about social media responsibility in platform history. Stephen kept his promise, deleted harmful content, and pivoted toward mental health advocacy. Emma and Stephen did have their conversation, which led to Emma becoming an advocate for healthier social media consumption among teenagers. She speaks at schools now about the difference between inspiration and dangerous expectations that destroy self-worth. And Sarah Mitchell became an unexpected voice in the movement for content creator accountability, working with platforms to develop better mental health resources and guidelines for young users worldwide. The night that changed everything wasn't about algorithms or influence or building empires. It was about a mother's courage, a creator's humility, and the understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is admit when you've been wrong and choose humanity over metrics and connection over content creation success.